Walter M. Mckay, policía estadounidense. En México, fue el director de la Oficina de Certificación Policial para el Instituto para la Seguridad y la Democracia, en el que creó un programa de certificación de la policía llamado Centro de Certificación Profesional de Agencias Policiales. Ha trabajado con varias agencias policíacas en México, lo que le da un punto de vista único dentro de la problemática a la que se está enfrentando la policía contra los cárteles. Actualmente, está trabajando en un proyecto para mapear las muertes relacionadas directamente con la guerra contra el narcotráfico.
Well, thank you very much. I'm very proud and happy to be here with my colleagues, Jack Cole and Ernesto, colleagues and friends. I've known them both for many years, so it's very nice to be on this panel with them. I'm going to start off with a bit of a personal anecdote, show you my vacation photo in Acapulco. I go to Acapulco with my family several times a year for several years now. And you can see in last July, I had company. Prior to these, there's actually 6 officers, soldiers there. There's 2 in the background that we can't see. But prior to that, there was about 14 naval officers dressed in casual clothes, their white pants and blue tunics and white caps, who were going along the beach, which are fairly empty now. If anybody's gone to Acapulco at any time, the crowds there are half of what they were just a few years ago. But what crowds there were, and the vendors, these the Marine officers were checking for ID and I don't know, weapons, I guess. Which at that point I thought was kind of unusual. I haven't seen that. I should take a picture. I didn't. Half an hour later, these guys show up carrying, you can see in their hands, their heavy-duty assault rifles, wearing body armor, wearing their helmets, and also checking for ID. And I took a picture. I just had to take a picture. They finished checking the ID of this individual there with the fuchsia-colored T-shirt you can see. So that was personalized. That really brought this whole situation that's happening in Mexico on a personal level. Unfortunately, the day after this picture was taken, I was swimming in our pool with my kids, 2 o'clock in the afternoon, and 8 to 12 shots shot out were fired in the alley right beside us, right on the other side of the fence. The ambulances attended, police attended, crowds attended, and I subsequently learned that a young man had been executed while drinking beer at the bar. Needless to say, my vacation was cut short. I left the next day very early, as fast as I could. The girls weren't happy about that, but again, it just brings a personal anecdote about what's happening. And this is what's happening. The pie chart here represents the 52,526 people who have been murdered in relation to narco crime as of February 11th, 2012. You can see at the top, 5.5% of these people were killed in 2007, and it goes all the way up to 32.5% as of last year. I thought 2010 was bad, 2011 was worse. However, the Mexican government's media reports are having us believe that it actually was a good time, or things were improving, because the difference between the number of deaths between 2010 and 2009 was a 70% increase, which was horrific, whereas for 2011 it was only 11%. So the analogy, though, for me, as soon as they say that, is if I throw somebody off of the top of the Burj Khalifa towers in Dubai, I can advise them by the 100th floor that everything's okay because they've reached terminal velocity. They're not going to fall any faster. There's many people who disagree in this audience, and academics in Mexico who disagree with the government's rosy view. In fact, Jorge Carrillo came out last August stating that the majority of the country, or 50% of Mexico, is now out of control. It's not, it's basically in the hands of the narcos. That's quite alarming. And it's alarming to be reminded of that last week, February 10th, when the US State Department came out and have now advised their US citizens that it's not 10 states that are unsafe, it's now 14 that are unsafe in Mexico. And they have a list. I'm not going to read through the list. I'm going a little faster than usual because Jack is too interesting to follow, so I'm shortening it up a little bit, not too much. And then we'll follow this up as well as the fact that the Mexican defense minister came out the other day as well and said that many parts of the country are ungovernable, that there is just no federal presence there. And this is one of the staff of the Calderon government. So things are worrisome. They were worrisome back in 2010 because not only had the rate of deaths accelerated greatly, 70% over 2009, but the manner in which people were being killed was becoming horrific. You had shootings, you had car bombs were appearing, you had people being skinned alive, you had messages such as having someone's face sewn to a soccer ball as a message, you had decapitations as very routine, and it became overwhelming, and I wanted to understand this just on a personal level. So what I started to do is I started mapping what was happening. And it's nothing complex. Basically, it's Google Maps, and I took the information that's made available through the media, and I would paste it where each event occurred. So each marker that you see there is an event where either 1 to 10 to 25 to 70 people have been killed in that particular event. These are all publicly available. You can access them yourself. You click on them, and any particular event you want, say in Mexico or in Zacatecas, it'll give you the state. As you can see, the number of people who were killed. And then on the bottom, there's actual link to the article where I got it from, whether it's El Universal or Rio Doce or Excelsior or whatnot. So you can read more about it if you want. The colors are interesting, or do have meaning. All the red markers are civilians. The red markers with a dot are civilians who have some prominence, say a doctor or a lawyer. The light blue push pins are journalists. The light purple push pins are politicians or maybe members of the family. It's politically motivated. The blue markers are police officers. The blue markers with a dot are police officers of high rank. Actually, they're security forces, so that would include police officers, soldiers, prison guards. Prison guards are, a lot of them are getting killed, etc. Unfortunately, when I first started the map in 2010, a few months later, I actually had to add a new marker, which was the yellow sun, because I had to start marking car bombs. As we know that there's a few that occurred back in 2010 and a couple in 2011. So there are yellow suns as well. White human outlines, I got a lot of email about that. I introduced that recently because people wanted to know, the innocence. And the reds, I'm not saying they're guilty, but the white human markers are, say, the 4-year-old child or their mother driving, to school or something like that. Someone's just clearly innocent. And then there's 2 green outline human figure outlines, and those represent mass graves. And I have to add a lot of those, unfortunately, too, as well. So this map here represents 1 week. Roughly, I can make about 200 entries in a Google map before it fills up. And there's anywhere from, I'll say 225 to sometimes 300 people killed per week. So I put in a new map on every week and archive the old ones. And the old ones are available for people to click through if you want on the website. So what these maps represent is that for me, they're a visual. They're a visual testimony of the state of Mexico, of where we're at right now, under the current strategy of using the military as a domestic police force. This is the crossroads that we're at, and it's one that we've been at really since December 2006. Because there was no trust in the underfunded, ill-equipped, and poorly trained police forces that were rife with corruption and inefficiency, the Mexican military was deployed. They're fairly well trained, highly respected, and the plan was to use them to replace the policing function where needed. But the problem conceptually with this is that yes, both soldiers and police officers wear a uniform and carry guns, but the idea that they can be interchangeable like board pieces on a board game is where it fails. For even though police officers and soldiers wear the uniform and carry weapons, they do not do the same thing. Their mission is not the same. Their objectives are not the same. Their ethos, their raison d'etre, is not the same. And because not many politicians seem to appreciate this, whether it's in the United States or Canada or Mexico, I'm going to explain why. Soldiers, simply put, are trained to kill. That's their job. We have soldiers because we have an enemy or a perceived enemy. They're recruited for traits such as fitness, to be a team player, to be obedient, and to be, above all else, loyal. They're trained to defeat an enemy as quickly and as most effectively as possible, up to and including killing them. Jack Cole knows full well that that's not the job of a police officer. I was a police officer in Canada. I know that was not my job. I was not trained to kill. In fact, what I was trained to do was to help people. People who could approach me, people who needed assistance for whatever difficulty they had. And some of it was great, and some of it was not so great. But for us, as a police officer, there was no enemy. No such thing. We are a member of the community. And as opposed to the soldier, we use the least amount of force to obtain our objective. In fact, if we can obtain it without using any force, then we're happy. So from the start, we can see that this 5-year-old strategy that's been used in Mexico has just conceptually been doomed to fail. Fundamentally, democratic policing is understood to concern itself with the investigation and solving of crimes that result in the conviction of criminals in a fair and just trial. And this is something that does not exist in Mexico in any form or fashion to this day. The reasons for this are too many to explore. I'm not going to go into them, but I'll just delve into one aspect of that. The patrol officers that you see in the streets in uniform, in the car, in Mexico City or anywhere in the country, are not police officers as we understand them in Canada or the United States or Britain. They do little in the way of investigation, crime scene protection, witness interviewing, etc. Their powers of arrest are very limited, and we can see that in the overall investigation rate of Mexico as a country, where Jack Cole is talking about 60% solve rate. That would be great to have here, because the solve rate here in Mexico is 2%. It's actually 1.7%. It's under 2%. 98% of all crimes are not, there's no one convicted for them. And we can see this sometimes, such as the mass graves in Durango last April, when the police were uncovering the grave sites with a backhoe and hand shovels, just literally scooping the bodies out of the ground. Any evidentiary value is gone. That's no hope there whatsoever. So in a sense, I can certainly sympathize with President Calderon and his initial decision to replace the police with soldiers in that sense, because at least the soldiers enjoyed the support and trust of the community. Okay. My piece of advice is that if the goal is to effectively challenge the TCOs, the trans criminal organizations, What is needed is the proper investigations and convictions. I know it's simple, but that's what we need, okay? With this in mind, the strategy that we currently have can be modified. For example, the military is already out on the streets. It is really difficult to put them back, but you can restrict what they do, and instead of having them supplant the function of the police, have them support the police. Second, with all the reform dollars and training of the police, instead of just arming them and retraining them in the mold or the paradigm of being soldiers and this whole concept of battling an enemy, train them as investigators. Train them as people, or as investigators who adhere to the rule of law, who respect human rights, who have the capacity to gather evidence, to use warrants, to interview witnesses, to interview, not interrogate suspects, you know, no bruises and cuts on their faces as they're paraded in front of the TV, and to focus on the safety and protection of the community. Rather than engaging in a war, something that police do not do in a democracy, the police need to be accountable to the community and responsive to its needs. Politically, I realize this is not as sexy as buying new cars, new guns, or helicopters. But in the long term, this is what needs to happen if Mexico is ever going to have a chance. What is needed is not bullets, but the rule of law and a working justice system. If he truly wants to wage an effective campaign against organized crime and make the country safe and secure, instead of deploying soldiers, Calderon should be deploying forensic accountants and investigators, i.e., drab suits and ties rather than sexy guns and bullets. Force is not the issue here, justice is, and a cornerstone of the justice is competent, unbiased investigations. Thank you. Okay, is this on? Okay, good. This question raised about if I agree with Mando Unuco, National Police Force, to take over. And actually I do. Conceptually, because the problems in Mexico are so rampant with the municipalities and the Policía Estatales, I think it just makes sense to create a single police force. What you'd have is training that's the same everywhere. Their wage would be the same everywhere. Their equipment would be the same everywhere. You wouldn't have the police officers, say, in Chiapas making 1,000 pesos a month, as opposed to in Baja California, the state police make 15,000 pesos a month. You wouldn't have those differences. So you'd have uniformity. And this is actually, the advice is actually different than the trend in the other countries such as Canada and the United States, where they're trying to break down the police forces and make them into more community policing, but they're dealing with different issues now. Right now, the prime concern is to professionalize and equip your police officers as they should be so they can do their job, men and women, as effectively and efficiently as possible. And I think the national model that was proposed by General Luna is the way to go. Try to get rid of the politics, try to get past the little fiefdoms that the mayors have in the state. They use their police as their personal bodyguards and stuff. You get past all of that. After 10 or 20 years of having a national police, then maybe go back and localize them. But you have to address this problem first, and that's a real issue. And part and parcel with that is it's not just the police. When I say you need police to conduct competent investigations, you need a justice system that can appreciate those competent investigations, that can prosecute these people properly. There's a film that I'm sure many people have heard, Presumed Guilty, which came out, a documentary last year. It just shows you the travesty of the justice system that exists in Mexico. So that's a big problem. The police are corrupt, but then so is everyone else. They're part of the big picture, and it really, that's why I didn't want to get into it, and I just say, I realize it's extremely complex, but ultimately, we need to focus on police officers as investigators and not as warriors, and that's where we're at. So that's a long answer to a short question. Somebody else wanted to know about data on undocumented immigrants, say Hondurans and can't speak. People who are killed on my maps that aren't Mexican. No, I don't. That's one piece of data I don't track. I could, and if you're interested in the information, I can go back into our database and certainly pull it up. But I spend 2 or 3 hours myself, and I have 4 other researchers who help me each day. Everybody spends 2 or 3 hours a day plotting these maps, and I do break it down into my database on gender, occupation, age group, a bunch of different variables that I can call up. Only some of them are shown here because these maps are basically they're for the public viewing, not so much for researchers. Researchers do contact me, and I do provide this other information for them. So, again, a long answer to a short question: no. And finally, the other one here is about the drug issue as well. And I'm part of LEAP as well. I do speak on behalf of LEAP, so I'm 100% in accordance with Jack Cole's position. And I want to add to it that as soon as you say no to any substance or any act, and say you can't do that, you remove the regulatory mechanism. Because I can't say don't do that, or I will, you can't bargain with them because you've already said do not do it. So if you say don't do drugs and someone does drugs, as Jack's explained, all I can do is throw you in jail. But I actually can't stop you from doing drugs. It's impossible. The drug problem in the American system is incredible. You got supermax prisons, which they do body scans on the mice and rats that get in there, and they still smuggle drugs inside. It's still an issue. And if that's the case, then how do you expect that to change when you say no to the teenagers, to your schools, you say no to Mexico, to smuggling it, you say no to everybody. You give up all regulatory mechanism. So instead of saying no, you do have to regulate, you have to legalize, or other mechanisms. And again, I don't get into so much as a policy issue because I'm not a policy specialist. But I do, as a former police officer, and many of those pictures remind me a lot of what I used to do as well. I used to arrest a lot of people doing drugs. Based on that experience, I know after thousands of arrests that I didn't make a difference whatsoever. Not a single difference. Thank you.